Hello and welcome to News Across Nigeria. I'm Olumide Macaulay. On today's program, the federal government to inject more funds into the Nigerian economy. Owners of structures get compensation as the Ekiti State government commences work on a flyover bridge. And meeting of officers of the anti-bomb squad in Yobe, in Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us. As the federal government steps up efforts towards repositioning the nation's economy, governors under the aegis of the Nigerian Governors Forum have pledged their support for the federal government in the effort to end the economic recession. Rising from an emergency meeting which held behind closed doors at the presidential villa, the governors also resolved to treat as a national emergency the recent outbreak of polio in Nigeria. They are also to work towards establishing the polio status of all states of the Federation, as well as work with the Federal Ministry of Health on the way forward. The chairman of the forum and governor of Zamfara State, Mr. Abdulaziz Yayi, told State House correspondents that the governors will also pay their counterpart funding to meet the obligations of polio eradication. About 15 governors, including those of Osun, Nasarawa, Kogi, Plateau, Sokoto, Akwa Ibom, Ondo, and Katsina states, as well as 3 deputy governors, were in attendance. To the state of the economy and the recession that the country is facing, the federal government is set to inject another 350 billion naira or $1.1 billion into the economy. In addition, the government will raise $1 billion from Eurobonds by mid-December to ease the recession. The Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosu, who told journalists in Abuja that in addition to the initial 420 billion naira released in May, the fund is primarily for capital expenditure. Mrs. Adeosu also noted that Nigeria plans to use 1.8 trillion naira at home and abroad to fund an expected budget deficit of 2.2 trillion naira.
We are raising money. As you know, the Eurobond capital raise is on. We're about to appoint our advisors, so we'll be raising an additional $1 billion. 2 weeks ago, we approved the external borrowing plan. That was very important because if you remember when we said we would borrow, we said we would borrow the cheapest money first. We have approvals in that plan from the World Bank, from ADB, from GCA, with interest rates as low as 1.5% and tenures as long as 40 years to intervene in some specific areas, which include agriculture, education, health, rebuilding of the Northeast, and there are a lot of, and of course the railway projects that are very key to what we're doing. So there's a lot of activity going on. The issue with fiscal initiatives is that there's always a lag. There's always a time difference between when you release money and when it has an effect. And what we're trying to do now is to work on how we can shorten that lag. Some of those delays are in the procurement processes. We're working on that. We're working with the ministries to try and speed things up. Quite a lot has gone on defense because we needed to rebuild and retool the capability of our army, particularly to continue with the efforts in the Northeast. Interior, transport. I'm sure you've seen activity has resumed on the abandoned airport product, the 4 international airport projects. We have funded those. Agriculture, of course, has received significant funding because of the time sensitivity of agriculture and because of the fact that food price was rising and we needed to intervene. There will also be funding of about 60 billion to the social intervention program, and that's very important in terms of putting money into people's pocket.
The Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosu. Now to the South in particular, where Ndokwa women in Delta State are taking up the challenge of aggressive farming as one of the ways to help the Nigerian economy, but they still face numerous obstacles such as access to proper inputs, land and funding. The women say the biggest threat to their livelihood is attacks by suspected Fulani herdsmen, which they say prevents any kind of farming.
According to the World Bank, for the 70% of the world's poor who live in rural areas, agriculture is the main source of income and employment. But depletion and degradation of land and water pose serious challenges to the production of enough food and other agricultural produce to sustain livelihoods and meet the needs of urban populations. These are the Ndokwa Daughters and Wives Association from Delta State, South Nigeria. They have gathered here to ask for land from the government to help them farm so as to increase food supply in the state. Receiving them on behalf of the governor, the Commissioner for Women Affairs says farming is life and is optimistic that the government will do all it can to help them.
I'm not surprised when you're talking and demanding for hectares of land for farming, because that is fair. You don't want woman on the road. You're coming out with it is that you are adding your own voice to the security situation, and definitely I know you will not leave any stone unturned.
President of the association talked about the importance of agriculture and the challenges they face as women.
We have tutored our women to go into agriculture, and one thing that is militating against this project is land. You just get one plot of land to do mechanized agriculture. It's not possible. And you cannot get this land from families. You cannot even buy. So the government is the best place we can acquire land.
In the move to diversify the economy with the fall in oil prices, there is a recognition that the rural woman plays a very important role in the overall welfare of the family and feeding the nation.
The federal government should give the manufacturing sector the serious attention it deserves by tackling the challenges of poor electricity supply and smuggling across the nation's borders. These are the views of textile workers during the 28th annual conference in Benin City, the Edo State capital. They believe reviving ailing sectors can also help the country out of its present situation.
As Nigeria struggles to come to terms with the economic recession the nation is facing, members of the National Union of Textile, Garment and Tailoring Workers of Nigeria gather in Benin City, the Edo State capital, for its annual education conference, which is aimed at x-raying the textile industry and its contribution to national development. First to speak is the national president of the union, John Adaji. He challenged the federal government to, as a matter of necessity, develop a template to revive the textile and garment industry, as doing so will lead to the creation of jobs for Nigerians.
The achievement of Buhari can only be measured by the numbers of the textile factory that's come back. Because that is the only sector that the army of unemployed we have today can absorb. So if anything must be done tangibly about unemployment, the textile sector is the place to go.
The General Secretary of the Union, Issa Aremu, identified power and the issue of smuggling as some of the factors responsible for the death of the textile industry, and says government must address these challenges to make the sector vibrant again.
We must provide adequate electricity to run the industry. So the DECO and the DISCOs, they have to deliver uninterrupted power supply. That's very, very important. And lastly, I think the cost of production is very high in this country. There are some of our inputs, that are valuable locally, but the charges are even so high, such as gas. And lastly, I think we must control smuggling. It's very, very important.
Governor Adams Oshomole, a former leader of the Textile and Garment Union, insists that government must first acknowledge that there is indeed a big challenge in the industry, and thereafter come up with a blueprint to fix the problems.
That the change, as it relates to the textile industry, must be to change from importing textiles into Nigeria to producing textiles in Nigeria and exporting them abroad. That is the change we must demand, and that change is realizable because as far back as 1952, the Premier of Northern Nigeria, Sir Ahmadu Bello, recognized that we should not be exporting raw cotton lint to Europe, that we should add value. That is how Kaduna Textile was set up.
This is the 5th time that the union's annual National Education Conference is holding in Benin City since its establishment 28 years ago. And the opinion here is that results from discussions at this event would help improve the nation's economy if adopted by relevant authorities.
You're watching news across Nigeria. Coming up, work begins on a bridge in Ado-Ekiti, the Ekiti state capital, even as residents whose houses got demolished in the way of building that bridge get compensation. Stay with us.